So this is just a test to see if the recording and the transcript is working.
Yeah, it's working.
Okay,
Yeah, it's recording on the transcript.
let's start then. Okay, good evening, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. Welcome to this call-in meeting of Overview and Scrutiny. Just to mention that the meeting is now being streamed live and recorded by the Council for subsequent broadcast via the Council's website. So first of all, let's go around and get some introductions from committee members. So I'll start with myself. My name's Matt White and I'm the chair of this committee. To my left.
Hi, Councillor Pippa Connor. I'm Vice Chair of this committee and Chair of Adults and Health Scrutiny.
Councillor Makbule Yunus, I'm the Chair of Children and Young People's Panel.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Michelle Simmons-Sappho. I am the Chair for the Culture, Environment, Safety and Community Panel. Big, long words. And I don't know why this is doing this.
I'm Councillor Alex Worrell. I chair the Housing Scrutiny Panel.
Thanks, everyone. We've got a number of officers here today, and I think we've got some other members joining us online. So I'll just ask those people to introduce themselves when they're speaking, just to save a bit of time. Right, next item is apologies for absence. We've had apologies from Yvonne Denny, and also apologies for not being able to join us in person from Lord Kiva, who is hoping to join us online. I'm not sure if she's managed to join us yet. Okay, so items of urgent business. So this being a special meeting, there are no new items of urgent business, but we've received a supplementary pack with documents for consideration for this call-in as item 6. These are exempt documents, so there will be a motion to exclude the press and public after we consider item 6E that will allow the committee to consider this exempt information. Okay, right. Next item is declarations of interest. Do any committee members wish to indicate any declarations of interest they have to make? No. Okay, right. So just to let everyone know what we're doing tonight, because it's been a while since this committee has heard a call in, and it's been there's been a lot of changes to the makeup of the committee since then. So the committee's been asked to scrutinise the decision that was taken by the Cabinet on the 5th of December 2023 on leisure management. The decision can't be implemented until this committee has undertaken scrutiny. But just to be clear, that this is not a decision-making committee, so we're not retaking the decision. We don't have the power to overturn the decision. All we can do is scrutinise it, and if we decide to do so, ask the Cabinet to have a look at the decision again. So the call-in is specifically related to the decision that was taken by Cabinet on the 5th of December, which was as follows. So these were the resolutions. Number 1 was, having considered the available options presented, to agree that Haringey Council's leisure services will be brought back in-house as described in option 5 in section 6.32 of the report for that meeting, for the reasons set out in the report, including the TUPE process for Fusion's Haringey workforce. Resolution 2 was, following the serving of 12 months voluntary termination notice on Fusion Lifestyle on the 3rd of October 2023, in-house leisure service provisions shall commence no later than the 2nd of October 2024. Resolution 3 was that the revenue budget and capital programme implications of the decision to insource would be included in the draft medium-term financial strategy for 24-25. And Resolution 4, that the decision to novate any or all of the related contracts, including those considered as key decisions from the existing service provider to the Council, be delegated to the Director of Environment and Resident Experience. Okay, so I now refer to the Deputy Monitoring Officer, Heidi.
Thank you, Chair.
Just a note to remind members of the committee that this is a two-stage process. And you will see in the pack at page 2 that members will be asked to determine whether the original decision is inside or outside of the budget or policy framework. And if it is within the budget and policy framework, as per the advice in this report, is to bear in mind the 3 possible outcomes. That is to take no action and basically do nothing, or refer it back to cabinet with some recommendations, or thirdly, refer it to full council. That third option is a very unusual option, and full council has no more powers than this committee has. And so you'll be basically asking full council to fulfill your role as a scrutiny committee. And that third option, whilst available, is very seldom used.
Thank you very much for that. Right, now I'm going to briefly explain the running order of the meeting, so everyone's clear what we're doing tonight and in what order. So we're going to start out with the deputation from Gerard, and we've also got some public questions. Then the lead-in signatory, Councillor Corley Harrison, will be asked to put forward his call-in. Then will there be questions from the members of the committee for the call-in. Following that, the cabinet member, Councillor Arkell, will be asked to respond to the call-in. Then there'll be questions from the committee for Councillor Arkell and the officers who are here this evening. Following this, we will exclude the press and public, and committee members will leave the room alongside the cabinet member and officers, so that we can consider the exempt information in a separate room. After we've considered that exempt information, we will then go off on our own as the committee and have a discussion, deliberate and make our decision in the way that the deputy monitoring officer has outlined. We'll then return to the meeting room and relay the decision that we've made. Okay, so I'd like to remind everyone that only issues raised in the call-in should be considered during the meeting. Okay, so that's what we're doing tonight. So let's make a start. So we've received a deputation and public questions as part of this item. So first of all, I'd like to call on Gerard McGrath, who's representing Unison, to put forward his deputation. Gerard, welcome. Thank you for coming here this evening, and you've got 3 minutes to address the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and Happy New Year to the committee. Unison and the other recognised trade unions in Haringey Council welcome the agreed plan to bring our leisure services back under direct control. It will become more publicly accountable and transparent and inspire new confidence in our residents regarding meaningful leisure services that they can rely on. The Council understands the inherent difficulties in privatising a critical service which should be delivered directly by the Council, along with the difficulties in allowing such an essential public service to be managed externally, as is the case now. Handing this to an external body, in this case Fusion Lifestyle, has been tried and has clearly failed spectacularly. Handing this contract to yet another private or external body would be a failure to learn from this mistake. Accounts of near misses, particularly at Park Road, regarding the correct management of chlorine have alarmed many of our members and local residents living next to the centre and those using the facilities during various very stressful evacuations. Our Unison members are already relieved that they will, from October 24, be cheaply transferred and directly employed by Haringey Council, who meaningfully engage with staff through various fora, including regular structured meetings with us. Unison's experience of Fusion in Haringey is of appalling management practices, divisive tactics, and a complete refusal to engage in any way whatsoever with unions to help improve working conditions. We are confident that the current administration is adhering to its manifesto commitment to insourcing public services. The manner in which Fusion Lifestyle has run all of the centres into the ground is reckless and contemptible for both its staff group and the residents of Haringey, in particular, vulnerable and elderly residents. We look forward, as always, to working with the Council in welcoming our members and other Fusion employees back to an employer who will treat them with respect, provide meaningful career progression opportunities, and help our members acquire additional skills to enable them to explore other options in planning their career paths. This can only lead to a better leisure offer for all of our residents throughout the whole of the borough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard, and thank you for keeping well within time. Okay, so now's the opportunity for committee members to ask Gerard any questions they may have on the deputation that he's brought today.
I don't have a question, but more rather a comment to say thank you very much. I concur.
Oops, thank you, Councillor Saffo. Gerard, can I ask, are the current employees of Fusion, as far as you're aware, are they members of Unison or any other union, as far as you know? They're all members of Unison, are they? Does anyone else have any questions for Gerard? Councillor Gunesh.
Just a clarity, really. So Fusion does allow union, like it offers its employers to the choice to join a union or not.
They can't refuse it because it would be illegal, but they do not recognise trade unions.
They don't recognize.
Can I just expand on that? When the transfer happened originally, prior to that, I had a practice of going around to the leisure centres, speaking to leisure centre manager and our members. I was told in no uncertain terms I was not welcome at any Fusion site unless I'm representing somebody who is subject to a formal process.
Maybe you could just expand a little bit further on what the difference would be then for a member of your union who is working for Fusion, and if they have a dispute.
Yeah.
Okay, apologies for anybody listening. We just had a slight issue with the loose cable, which caused the audio to cut off. Okay, Gerard, sorry, I was asking, could you just go into a bit more detail about what if say an employee of a leisure centre had some kind of dispute with their employer? How would it be different for them as a member of Unison if they're working for an employer that doesn't recognise a union, like Fusion, you say, and if they were working for a council or another employer that does recognise the union?
I mean, I think part of the difference is that my 20-year experience of being a rep in one way, shape or form has taught me, and there are people in this room that can attest to this, that working continuously with management on cases or issues that affect our members is extremely useful and pays off a lot in the end. So you might have a member who might be in a certain sticky situation. If I have that here in the council, I can have a conversation with the manager in that section to try and gauge what we're looking for here, what are we doing, what is there any, we can negotiate basically. In Fusion, that cannot happen. So the only time I get invited to go into any of these centres is if one of our members is either subject to the sickness policy, grievance, disciplinary capability, any of the employment policies, they're allowed by law to have a rep present. The difference between what we do in the council and what Fusion does is that we're allowed to come in at the investigation stage of a process. Fusion doesn't allow that. Fusion are sticking to the minimum ACAS guidelines in this respect. So they're not breaking the law, but they're not operating or functioning in an honourable way.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to understand a bit better. You said, Gerald, that this would be it's a historical opportunity for council to kind of basically do something useful by insourcing. There will be, I suppose I just wanted to kind of understand what would be, in your opinion, what would be the wider benefits of insourcing the leisure provisions, really. Thank you.
I think if you, it's a good question. I think if you spoke to many of our members in Fusion at the moment, there is an immense morale issue. Morale has plummeted. There's no confidence whatsoever in the senior leadership team of Fusion across the country, never mind London. The key differences would be that in my opinion, that employees who transfer back into the council will have a more solid basis to trust their employer. And the council, actually, if I point you towards the New River Sports Centre is a good example. That has changed dramatically in the short time it's come back into the council's hands. You speak to our members there, please. I would invite the committee to go and speak to them directly, and they will tell you the difference they've experienced in being employed by a company which hides behind charitable status and doesn't behave in an ethical way towards its employees. I mean, it has an equal opportunities approach to employees and people who use their services, just don't care about them. We have shown that we can turn that around with New River as an example, and we will follow that. I'd like to think the council, working in tandem with the recognised unions, will get to that point with these centres when they come back in-house. Is that okay?
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, no further questions. Thank you very much, Gerard, for coming along this evening for your deputation. Of course, you're welcome to remain in the seating area and apologies. Yeah. And sorry, Councillor Arkle, you've got 3 minutes to respond.
Thank you, Councillor White, and thank you, Gerard, for coming and making your deputation here this evening. It's been really helpful to hear your views and those of your members that you represent, particularly around the fact that by bringing leisure services in the house, we'll make sure that they are publicly accountable and democratically run. You are absolutely right to say that outsourcing has not worked, and there are no guarantees that taking out a new contract with another leisure provider will work or be better. I'm also concerned about some of the issues that you've raised in your deputation and in the questions and the answers that we've received from other committee members this evening, particularly about the way Fusion has managed the centres, its treatment of staff and vulnerable and elderly and disabled residents. One of the key benefits of insourcing the leisure service is the enhanced salary that can be offered to staff through improved terms and conditions and pensions. And the council is committed to harmonising the leisure workforce onto council's terms and conditions. And I'm pleased that this is welcome and supported by the union that you represent and your members. I think it speaks volumes that Fusion does not recognise unions. For me, that is all you need to know about that organisation as an employer. We recognise the challenges of bringing in approximately 70 members of staff in-house. It is going to represent a really significant cultural exercise to welcome and induct and train staff onto the council's policies, our procedures and our values. Communications with incoming staff are going to be critical to achieve a smooth transition, and staff engagement, including one-to-one support, will be offered, and we've already started to think about how to operationalise that. Workforce, a large proportion of whom are residents here in Haringey, can expect to have better training and progression opportunities with the council, which will, we hope, lead to a more motivated, loyal workforce with lower sickness rates and a better standard of people coming forward for the roles within the service. You've already mentioned the success we've had at New River, and we think we can replicate that across the other sites we have. The council can also drive local employment opportunities and further benefit our residents in our communities. We look forward to working with you, Gerard, and to your members who you represent to make insourcing a success and to improving leisure services for the staff that work in the centres and for the residents who use them.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arkell, and also thanks to you for keeping well within the 3 minutes limit. Okay, thank you very much, Gerard. So we've also received some public questions from Katie Ferguson. Katie, would you like to come forward and ask your questions?
Hi, thank you for allowing us, the Park Road Lido user group, to bring these questions to your committee. I'm the chair of the user group that, as you know, represents over 1,000 outdoor swimmers at Park Road Lido, the only outdoor swimming facility in the borough and currently one of only 2 public swimming pools in Haringey. We welcome the decision to terminate the contract with Fusion, but our concerns are that the decision made by Cabinet on the 5th of December 2023 did not take sufficient account of the full consequences of taking leisure services in-house. In particular, we are extremely concerned that the Chief Finance Officer has reported that there's no commitment to additional revenue or capital spend in 24-25. While the Director of Environment and Resident Experience has stated that all 3 sites in the borough need repair and investment to bring them up to industry standards. There's a stated commitment for the council to make the leisure services attractive and income generating, but at the same time, the condition surveys of 2022 identifies many problems with regard to the deteriorating facilities. In the case of Park Road, there's a long-standing water treatment issue that will be expensive and difficult to resolve. The contractual agreement with Fusion was inadequately drafted, but this shouldn't be used as an argument against considering other contractors, as the council now has the benefit of past experience. We're not necessarily favouring the use of an external contractor, simply pinpointing weaknesses in the argument presented to Cabinet. There's an ambition for tailored services to meet the needs of Haringey residents, yet to date there's been no consultation with residents, and the threat of cuts to council budgets in social and adult care, as well as other services, clearly leaves the leisure services vulnerable. And this threat to service delivery has not been considered. Our questions to the committee are specific to the Lido at Park Road, as our members are keen to ensure that the Lido is open all year, not only for the benefit it offers, but also to address the shortfall of swimming opportunities in the borough. Finally, our questions are you aware of how much it will cost to run the Lido per annum? Do you know how much the energy saving measures reduce this cost? Have the Lido income generation figures been modelled? And lastly, if there's a funding gap, do you have a plan for how this will be financed?
Thank you very much for your questions. So just to be clear on how this all works, I understand that these were submitted as questions rather than as a deputation.
Yeah.
So the rules are slightly different. The questions, they need to be directed to the chair of the body to which you bring that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those questions and I'm going to treat it as a request for the committee to take those issues into account and ask those kind of questions to the cabinet member when it comes to that part of the meeting. So I'm not going to ask Councillor Arkell to respond now, but rest assured we will be asking those questions that you've put today to Councillor Arkell when it comes to that part of the meeting. So thank you very much.
So is that the part of the meeting that's in public or not in?
Yes, that part of the meeting is in public. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So next part of the meeting is we hear from Councillor Corley Harrison, who is the lead signatory on the call-in. Councillor Corley Harrison, can you come and introduce your call-in? You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, everybody. So as the Chair indicated at the head of the meeting, it's been a few years since there's been a call-in. So to be clear, we are not an opposition group that regularly calls decisions in, unlike some in certain local authorities. And this isn't us calling in a decision to insource. The reason we're calling it in is because we think that there was insufficient information provided to the Cabinet to make an informed decision, as well as a number of other reasons that I'll run through when we get to it. I also want to be clear that whilst I welcome the deputation and I have my own thoughts on Fusion, which I have stated publicly, this is not a decision between Fusion and insourcing. Fusion's gone. That's already been decided. This is a decision between 5 options that were presented to Cabinet last month. So as part of the call-in, we submitted a number of reasons for calling in the decision last month. They were, and I'm sure that you've read them, but that the decision was taken without evidence that insourcing provides value for money, and providing value for money is a core part of the policy framework. The Cabinet report provided no effort to quantify the costs and benefits of the different options. Cabinet was not provided with information about the comparative costs of a new leisure management contract in the immediate term, despite several providers, 4 providers, I think, displaying interest. There was no attempt to interrogate the ongoing costs of running the leisure service in-house or under a new contract, as details of the finances were not provided even under an exempt report, which I should add is highly unusual. I actually can't remember the time when the financial details were not provided as part of an exempt report. The external advice, as I said, in respect to financial modelling was not included. There was no consideration of a joint contract with another authority, and residents have not been consulted at all about who should run the service. Now, one of the key aspects is the financial risk to the council. As we know, there are significant financial risks to all councils at the moment, but we have a funding gap this year that still needs to be filled, and a funding gap next year that's an ever increasing funding gap over the medium term. 16.3 million forecasted to grow to 44 million. So given the poor financial position of the council, Cabinet obviously needs to consider not only whether the higher cost of insourcing can be justified, but whether this model of leisure delivery is more important than other services that it may sacrifice, because the additional cost of insourcing will mean cuts to other services, as we have seen from the budget. Table 9.5 in your pack shows that insourcing is the costliest option. It costs £700,000 more per year, based on the data in your pack, than using a specialist provider to run the service. And by that, I'm not talking about Fusion. I'm talking about an actual specialist provider. And it's £1.5 million more a year than if the council were to lease the sites to an external provider. None of that information was provided to the Cabinet members in the Cabinet report when they made the decision. So they made it without financial information. The report suggested that a 20% contingency should be added to the option to use an external contractor, but no contingency has been afforded for the insourcing option, even though we know that many council projects overspend and overrun both on the revenue side and the capital side. And the report also states that the council will be looking at different opportunities for generating income and reducing operating costs. The service needs to be under direct control to realise these opportunities, which suggests that all options would be on the table for revenue savings if the service were in-house. So not only will it cost the council more to run each year, but it may lead to a reduction in services to residents. That would not be necessary if a strong contract with an external provider, which would bake in those £700,000 a year in revenue savings from the get-go, without a reduction in service, was offered. The risk is significant if the council is forced to issue a Section 114, which a number of local authorities have, then leisure services are not a statutory service. So it would face cuts and potential closure. And we're not talking in 10 years, we're talking within the next year or 2 years. There would be greater protection if a contract with an external provider was offered. Even with inflation falling, charges at New River are due to increase by around 7% next year, and concessionary discounts are being reviewed as part of proposed savings. If the service is insourced,
5 minutes is up now, so can you wind up,
Yeah.
please?
So I'll just conclude with what our request is. So we remain, despite the response in the report, satisfied that the alternative course of action we proposed in our call-in, which is part of your pack, still stands. There were a number of recommendations to you as an overview and scrutiny committee, and we hope that you will send this back to Cabinet with all of the information we have requested for them to make the decision again with all of the information presented in front of them. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Corley Harrison. Okay, so members of the OSC, do you have any questions for Councillor Corley Harrison? Maybe I will start, actually. I'll start because I just have a question of clarification, actually. You talk about the decision being outside the budget and policy framework. It isn't clear to me because you seem to state explicitly that it's outside the policy framework, but then you seem to raise the possibility that it's also outside the budget framework. So first part of my question is, are you saying it's outside both the policy framework and the budget framework? And if so, could you explain how it's outside the policy framework? Is there a specific policy that it contravenes, and where can that policy be found? And if you're also saying it's outside the budget framework, could you elucidate in the same way of how it's outside the budget framework? Thank you.
Yeah, so any policy-making decision should indicate that the option chosen offers value for money. Doesn't necessarily have to be the best value for money. It can still be an option that's chosen that is second, third, fourth best. It's up to you, not you, the Cabinet members as decision makers. But it is our belief, me and my co-signatories, that information provided, the information provided in the original Cabinet report did not provide sufficient levels of detail to evidence the fact of whether this was offering value for money or not, because no financials were provided. So Cabinet members were unable to establish whether value for money is being offered by taking it in-house, or if it's not being offered, what are the other benefits? And as the report indicates, value for money doesn't necessarily is not the only reason for decision making. There are other decisions to be made, but it is part of the policy framework. So for that reason, we believe it falls outside of the policy framework. We're not saying that it falls outside of the budget framework. The submission for the call-in requested that the monitoring officer looked at whether it fell outside of the budgetary framework as well. And they have responded as part of the pack on that particular topic.
Thank you. Councillor Worrell, you had a question.
Thanks. I was just wondering, is your issue that the kind of detailed financial justification was never provided to the people that made the decision, or is it is it just that it's not in the Cabinet report itself? Because presumably we would all expect and assume that the Cabinet members had been privy to that information kind of the whole time as these sort of discussions were developing.
Yeah, so there would be an expectation that the information would be in a written report, but exempt if it contains commercially sensitive information. You know, we've all seen it with many decisions, and there was reference to a third-party analysis done that considered all of the options, and that report was referenced in the pack, but it wasn't included. So, and there was also no evidence in the pack that the Cabinet members were given that information. There is a suggestion in the response to the call-in that the cabinet and cabinet members have been part of discussions. What that means, we have no evidence of. So had that information been provided in an exempt report, we would make the assumption that all cabinet members had read that exempt report and they would be making an educated decision based on that. But without having that as part of the cabinet paper, even though it would be exempt, we have absolutely no way of confirming that the cabinet members that made the decisions were aware of the difference between the options in terms of the finances, in terms of the scoring, in terms of the benefits to the council beyond the sort of the top line statements that were in the original report. A number of the charts in the response to the call-in from the lead officer are very, very useful. I would have expected to have seen those in the report, and perhaps if they had been, then we wouldn't have needed to have the call-in. But unfortunately, that information was not provided. So we're on the assumption that cabinet members were not provided with that information.
I'm going to bring you in a moment, Councillor Simon-Saffo, but can I just ask, because if you're saying that you might not have needed to bring the call in had that information that's in the response, if that had been in the cabinet report, if you're satisfied this evening that actually the cabinet members had access to that information in making that decision, even though it wasn't in the papers, how does that affect your position on this call-in?
Well, I wouldn't be satisfied because it would be someone suggesting that the papers were what circulated to cabinet members before, that they were briefed in a meeting, maybe. If the cabinet papers are part of the cabinet decision that the cabinet members are taking, then they are deciding on the papers in front of them. They're not deciding on information that was provided, 3 months earlier in a meeting between officers and themselves. So the decision is the decision on what is presented in the reports. All of the information was not presented in the report, and so I wouldn't be satisfied that they necessarily had that I'm certainly satisfied that they have that information, and therefore, the call-in is unnecessary. They need to be making the decision with all of the information as part of the report, albeit in the exempt part.
So crucially, basically, what you're saying is that all information on which a decision is to be based must, in your view, be part of the reports, even if they're exempt reports. And if they're not, if a decision is being based on information that may have been available to the cabinet members but isn't part of the exempt or public reports, then you would deem that decision invalid.
We need to be satisfied that key information has been read by the cabinet members, and it is that key information that they are agreeing to. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Simon-Saffo.
Question I'm asking, is this about transparency? Not necessarily about the detail, but you requiring to have the information at hand that an executive decision was made with all the facts on the table. Is that it?
Correct, Councillor.
The next thing that I'm going to ask is about, you were talking about number crunching and money, but we have a template that is there at the moment, which is New River Sports Centre. And there's certain things that money cannot buy. Certain things in the aspects of our constituents who actually live and work in the borough will be homegrown. There'll be a sense of satisfaction. We have seen already that, be it fusion, it could be called Antirrini in a blue spoon, but we have seen that there has been an outsource which has not been viable for the residents. So therefore, if we have a template by which we're working now, and we've seen that there has been a quality service, then why wouldn't we look at replicating that and transferring that? Because it's not just about the money. That's what I'm saying. You haven't mentioned in your calling anything relating to the things that money cannot buy.
Yeah, good question. So that is mentioned in the call-in actually, because we wanted a comparison between the options with a scoring system, which wasn't provided in the initial cabinet report, but has been provided in the response to the call-in. So why that couldn't have been provided in the original report, we don't know. Unfortunately, that does raise more questions than it actually answers, because the scoring system seems a little bit odd, I have to say, because the scoring system indicates that there is less risk from the council to performance, less risk to performance from the council insourcing versus using an external provider. Of course, the council, other than New River, does not have leisure service experience, and New River doesn't have a pool and it doesn't have a Lido, so it doesn't have the experience of directly running those particular services, whereas an external provider does. And of course, you cannot tarnish all providers with the same brush based on Fusion, because the council insources it. It was insourced 10 years ago. It was given to Fusion in 2012 because the performance was so poor of the insourced leisure service. I think you've been in Haringey long enough to remember when it was insourced. So that was a major part of why it was insourced, along with revenue savings. So you know, based on that, we'd be saying, well, we can't insource again because it's already failed. Well, that's not necessarily the case, is it? Because we're 10 years on. And just because we've had one poor provider doesn't mean that we can't have another poor provider, can't have a good provider, or the council can't be another poor provider. But those scoring metrics don't weigh up. The other issue is that there was heavy weighting against well-being, which is great, but it was against a well-being policy which doesn't exist. So we're not sure where that scoring system comes from. That seems to put the decision above using an external provider. So a lot of things are just unanswered. We do not have the detail, and the cabinet members therefore did not have the detail to make that decision. If they had the detail at the time and they're making that decision and it all goes wrong, that's on them. But if they haven't had the detail at the time, how can they possibly be making that decision? It's just, you know, it's just based on a load of, you know, top line report introductions and guesswork, really. And that's the concern here, that just there was not information that is really, this is a really crucial service, really, really important. But it's also a huge amount of money that the council are planning on spending here, over £10 million capital. And like I say, it's an extra £700,000 a year to have it in-source versus using an external provider. So it's a big amount of money. It's not just a small decision being made about, you know, a new advert being put up somewhere.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Councillor Ganesh, you haven't asked a question yet.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to sort of better understand, like, so you're saying that the cabinet probably didn't have this information when they were making that decision. So in my opinion, or where I kind of said, wouldn't that be wrong? If you don't have adequate information, you would ask for more information. Therefore, you would kind of so if the cabinet was basically not making a sound information based on all the facts and so on, are you accusing the cabinet of making a political decision? Because that's what it's kind of coming across. Like, what are they trying to achieve? Are they, I mean, obviously they're dealing with the budget pressures. We are all well aware of it. Knowing that and making a decision like that would be kind of irresponsible in a way. So I'm just trying to understand what could be the motivation of the cabinet for making this decision other than serving the, you know, residents. Yeah.
Well, decisions made by cabinet are always political. I'm making no accusations. You know, if the policy direction of this administration is to insource, then that's their policy decision, and that's for them to decide. That's, as I say, we don't regularly call things in, and it's not a call in based on a particular decision that we don't like as a group of backbench councillors. The issue we have is that the decision was made, you know, unquestionably without all of the information provided. And to go back to what you originally said, yes, I would have expected them to ask for more information. If there's an external report mentioned that cites information, including financial information, referenced in the pack but not included in the pack, then I would expect those cabinet members to be asking for to see that information before they feel like they can make a sound decision. But we know how the process works. It's well, I would say very unusual for a cabinet decision to not be made under recommendation. I say very unusual. I cannot remember a time when it hasn't been made under recommendation. So I'm not suggesting that there was any intent or anything like that. It would just be very unusual for a decision to be made that went against the recommendation that was put in the pack, regardless of what that was.
Thanks. Councillor Worrell.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to some of the kind of concerns you've raised, and particularly with regard to some of the responses that are in the report. So you've kind of spoken a lot about risks to insourcing that you think haven't been adequately considered. And you've kind of spoken about awarding a new contract as a sort of low risk option, but would you accept that there are actually a lot of risks with awarding a new contract? I mean, we had a contract with Fusion and they failed to meet the contract and we continuously weren't able to force them to. There's a lot of volatility in the sector. You know, who knows what's going to happen with energy bills? More providers might fold. And, there are sort of commercial incentives that a council doesn't have. So, do you not think there's actually quite a lot of risks with awarding a new contract as well?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. I think all the decisions carry risks. That's why one of our requests for course of action is to do a 5-year risk analysis. So I think all 5 options, unless some were completely dismissed, but if they were, then they wouldn't be presented as options. Then they should absolutely have robust risk analysis presented to the cabinet for them to make that decision on. So of course there's risk to the council if they were to insource and they were to go bankrupt, the service would end. Of course, there's risk that if they weren't going to go bankrupt, but they needed to reduce staff, that certain services would no longer be available, which is why you have the Lido group here, and they were also at cabinet, raising their concerns, who are also not necessarily against it being insourced. They're just concerned about the risk. But you're right, if you were to use an external provider, there's risk they would go bankrupt. There's risk that we end up with the same as Fusion. But we would be choosing from providers that we are able to see how they have performed in other local authority owned leisure services, and that would be part of a risk analysis when the options are considered. But again, other than very top line comparisons between the options, there was, in our view, there was not sufficient risk analysis done between them over the next, say, 5 years, which seemed to be the time frame that they were looking at for the awarding of the contract, were it to go to someone else. So that's the reason that we said 5 years as well, because that's what's referenced in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Connor, you have a question.
Okay, very quick question, because most of it's been dealt with already, but picking up on the financial risk aspect. So you mentioned an increased amount of money that the council will be liable for if it insourced. So do you think this puts a financial risk on the council as a whole because of the current situation, the financial situation, about our needing to make new savings of about 30 million in the next financial year and 44 million in 2 years' time? Do you think the risks here on the finances of insourcing compared to the new contract play a part in their concerns about how the council is going to be stable in those next coming years?
I mean, the reality is that no decision can be made in isolation when it comes to anything that's including finances or budget. So as a direct comparison, on the same evening the budget was presented and there were 600,000 in savings to library services, cuts to library services by reducing staff by 50 odd, I think it was, I can't remember the exact number at the time, by 50 odd staff members. I mean, that is the direct comparison as an example, but there are other examples. I mean, not doing this is not going to be the 16 million shortfall and suddenly everything's okay and we have a balanced budget, but every single bit contributes. And that's why it's really important that when decisions are made, they're made transparently and with all of that information in front of those that are making the decision, not necessarily in front of us, but in front of those that make the decision. So I think that every single decision that includes a lot of money needs to be very heavily scrutinized now, more so than ever before. And so it's really important that we, as non-decision making councillors, do that. It's a really important part of our job, important part of the scrutiny's job, that every single decision we are looking at and really scrutinising to make sure it is best value for residents, best value for the council, and isn't going to put us into perilous states in the next, well, 12 months, 24 months, whatever it may be. And, you know, if people make that decision based on all the information, then fine, it's on their conscience when it comes to any future issues.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions? I can't see any. Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, I won't forget this time. Councillor Arkell, your response to the call-in, please. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Councillor White, and thank you, Councillor Cawley-Harrison, as well for your deputation and statement this evening. So my introduction to the original report considered by Cabinet on the 5th of December 2023 sets out the rationale and case for insourcing leisure provisions that is democratically run and accountable to residents in Haringey. Our response to Councillor Cawley-Harrison's call-in of the decision taken at that meeting is clearly set out in the report that's been circulated this evening, which you've all had sight of, and we've refuted all of these points. I believe our decision fits within both the policy and budgetary framework. The provision of leisure services is key to helping our residents in the future to enable them to lead active and healthy lives, whilst also tackling the wider determinants of ill health, such as social exclusion and isolation and loneliness. Access to sports and leisure facilities is central to health and well-being for residents of all ages, and we want to play an important role in tackling health inequalities experienced by many residents and help them to lead more active lives. We pledge to run a different kind of council, giving more power to people. This insourcing is an opportunity to collaborate with our communities to provide better services. It is a decision which gives our residents more control, knowing their leisure services will be run by a democratically run council, not a private for-profit company, which has proven not to work. It is deeply disappointing that this decision has been called in, especially after listening to Councillor Cawley-Harrison's rationale for doing so earlier this evening. Insourcing the leisure service is a significant opportunity for the council to improve services for our residents and to improve working terms and conditions for its staff and provide employment and opportunities for them. Insourcing this service is in line with the manifesto commitment made by Haringey Labour in 2022 and the mandate which we were elected upon where Labour gained seats in the borough. At the heart of our decision is an ambition to offer affordable leisure and wellbeing services to everyone who would like to access them. This is what we were elected to do, it is what we have done, and it's what we will continue to do. We want everyone to be involved in designing our new service and are already planning how we can include people from across the borough. We've already demonstrated that we can insource leisure services and that we can do it well. The leisure service at New River, which was brought in-house in 2021, has shown what a Labour council can do when it collaborates with and listens to its residents, responding directly to their views and making services inclusive to the diverse communities in our borough. Since August 2021, the council has improved the services and the facilities on offer and increased the financial performance of the New River site. Assessment of what option provides best value should not be solely limited to cost, but also consider the environmental and social value benefits. Given the council's net zero carbon aspirations and the importance of the wellbeing model referenced in the Cabinet report in December 2023, we have chosen to take a balanced and holistic approach in assessing the pros and cons of the options available in the future leisure and wellbeing offer for residents in Haringey in the future. Consultation, engagement and co-production with residents is a key priority for our council in the preparation of the new service offer for October 2024 onwards. The question is not who provides these services, but what services do our residents want available and what are the qualities and the values of this service for all our residents. We are planning extensive engagement with service users, residents who don't use the services at the moment, stakeholders and partners early in this year. This is in line with the Haringey New Deal and will help shape the service design going forwards and make sure it's responsive to the needs of our different communities. Our ambition is for a service that meets the needs of residents. We can deliver a service that will be integrated and adapted as required to deliver continuous improvements for residents. The best way to do this is through direct control of services, not through a restrictive and inflexible contract that fixes us into a model of delivery for a long period of time. I want to reassure the committee and our residents that we have taken our role as a cabinet and as elected decision makers extremely seriously. I confirm my view that nothing raised in the call-in changes my view, and I reject the recommendations from Councillor Cooley-Harrison. I can also confirm that the decision taken by the Cabinet on the 5th of December is the correct one and it should be upheld.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arkell. Okay, thank you for answering our questions, Councillor Cooley-Harrison. So now is the opportunity for members of the committee to ask questions of Councillor Arkell and the officers here present. So this is on the response to the call-in. This is item 6E in the reports. So I'm going to start off following on from the public questions from Katie Ferguson and just put those questions to the cabinet member and officers. So these questions were related specifically to the Lido facility at Park Road. So the questions are as follows. Are you aware of how much it will cost to run the Lido per annum? Do you know how much the energy saving measures reduce this cost? Have income generation figures been modelled for the Lido? And finally, if there is a funding gap, is there a plan for how this is going to be financed?
I'm happy to start and then I'll ask officers to join me. So in response to the first question, which is around the cost to run the Lido per year. So the Lido is obviously an integral part of the provision at Park Road and it is a really valued piece of it's really valued by the community. I know from my own experience of using it myself how important it is, both the gym, the indoor pool and the outdoor and the Lido itself. So we have costed into the operation at Park Road as a whole, the running costs for the Lido for full 12 months of the year. They've not been separated out and the reason for that is because we don't see an eventuality where we're going to be operating the Lido as a separate entity from the rest of the operations at Park Road. I'm going to stop there and just ask if the officers have got anything else to contribute.
Anything further to add from officers? No.
No, thank you. I think that covers it. Could I make a point of clarity though? I'm not sure this is the right moment to do it or not, but it feels like I probably should.
Yes, that's fine.
It's just, I think there's a statement around the capital investment, around dilapidations and repairs to the asset. Just for clarity, we do have budget for repairs 24-25 of £3.6 million, and there's a total of £7.6 million over 5 years for dilapidations and repairs for the assets when they transfer. And there's also additional revenue growth allocated in the budget of £946,000 per annum to run the service effectively. So I just wanted to make that point. But thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. Right, okay. So now's the opportunity for.
Do you want me to answer the rest of the questions? I've only answered the first one.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
So the second one was around energy saving measures. So we estimate that the energy saving measures that we have planned will achieve 15 to 20% reduction in energy consumption. And that is built into our modelling. So that's built into the costs. The third was around the income generation figures for the Lido and how they've been modelled. So those have been modelled based on the information that we've been able to gain from Fusion. And we will continue to model that and project income streams throughout the period between now and October 2024, when the contract with Fusion finishes. It is an iterative process into the future, and it will look into both profit and loss management at the centre. And then the final question was around the funding gap and how that will be financed. So due to the high running costs, obviously pools across the country require subsidising through other income streams, and that's usually generated through different sales of different products and services, and that's also true of the Lido. Obviously, as I've said in my statement, and as it will be woven through all of our answers, is that we are absolutely committed to delivering a really high quality leisure provision across the borough, and the Lido is really key to that. And the financial performance of the Lido as the whole and Park Road will need to be considered as a whole as well. We are also committed to improving the standard of the operation at the Lido. I think it's been kind of mentioned and touched on a number of times already this evening about how Fusion has run the centres and some of the management within them, or lack of management in some cases. So the scenario we have modelled is the most likely in respect of risk to income and to pipeline customer base. But there's also a contingency available in event of financial impacts that materialise outside of our expectations and planned events. And one advantage of the provision of service being insourced is that we have got an opportunity to really flex and kind of think about how we can develop the Lido to generate further income streams and revenues. And that will enable us to really think about our cost base in the future as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for answering those questions.
I don't know if the officers have got anything to add to that as well.
No further comments from the officers on those answers. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we've got some questions for Councillor Arkell and officers from members. Councillor Worrell first.
Thank you very much. I imagine this is the question everybody wants to ask, but why was the financial modelling, the report that's been referenced, all of the sort of detailed figures not included as an exempt report in the cabinet decision? I don't really understand the argument in the report that this was done because you wanted the whole report to be public, because presumably you could have included all of the information that was in that public report and then still had those additional documents as an exempt report, which would have resulted in the same information being public. So this seems to be the crux of the matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Worrell. So there are a couple of points, I think. The first bit is around sensitivity, which I think comes out in that paper. With sensitivity of the commercial confidentiality requirements have been at the forefront of our minds right from the very start of this process. We are in an unusual position where we are effectively dissecting an operator's cost model in terms of us being able to understand where the best value will come from as an organisation, what the capital investment might be, what the revenue investment might be. And there are certain sensitivities around how that information is displayed, even in a confidential environment. So we have been cognizant of that throughout the process. There's also something about scale and size. In terms of the model that underpins the cabinet report itself and the decision making that's followed off of that, there are, I think, around 264 single spreadsheet tabs, all of which contain multiple layers of itemized information and more data. And assembling that or including that as an attachment wouldn't necessarily be particularly accessible anyway, and wouldn't be particularly easy to understand without analysis around it. And the cabinet paper itself is that analysis. And I think it's important to just, again, to make the point that the cabinet paper sets out the rationale for the recommended option. It sets out that rationale both in terms of the financial implications and also in terms of the wider best value benefits and opportunities around insourcing. It also talks around the risks and around some of the issues that are associated to that, and explains that in the body of that cabinet paper. It makes reference to the FMG report that's been commissioned by industry experts effectively to go and do that number crunching. And of course, members have the opportunity to review that paper as it's there as a reference background document if they want to as part of that. The intention always was that the cabinet paper itself offers a significant enough summary that there isn't a need to go further into those 264 spreadsheets. And that's how it's been effectively designed. The OSC report, obviously responding to the call-in issues, is a reiteration of the same information that's in the cabinet report. There isn't anything new there. We've changed how we've positioned it and how we've illustrated it with the use of charts or diagrams that perhaps aren't in the other one in terms of graphics. But a lot of that's around accessibility. So again, thinking about from an accessibility perspective, what we were attempting to do is to deliver a report that summarised quite a sophisticated financial model in a way that enabled members the opportunity to make a decision, whilst being cognizant of how, whether it's around visual impairment or whether it's around people being able to interpret data differently, that we were presenting something in the most accessible format, which is what we think we have done. So hopefully that gives you enough of a reason. There are multiple reasons, I guess, but predominantly it's about the scale, the size, and about that need for analysis, which the paper does itself.
I'm just going to come back on this question, unless you want to come back on it, Councillor Worrell. So what you're saying is that what we're seeing in the report you've provided with us today is essentially the same information, just repackaged. However, it seems to me when I look at the tables, let's see, we've got a table in 9.3, then we've got another table in 9.5, then a third table in 9.7 of your report. It seems that this ultimately is fairly quantitative in nature, and it comes down to a scoring system. Now, Councillor Corley Harrison has made some critique of that scoring system, but effectively it's there and it's a quantitative answer, and we've ended up effectively with a number of 88.6%, which favours the insourcing option over the 77.2% of the new contract. Now, that information wasn't there in a quantitative form in the original cabinet paper, and Councillor Corley Harrison has stated effectively this evening that it may have not have been possible for him and his colleagues to issue the call-in had that information been provided in the original cabinet report. So I suppose what we maybe need to have some confidence in is that information in a kind of quantitative form was available to not just the decision maker, Councillor Arkell herself, but also her 9 colleagues who were the actual collectively made the decision last month.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I can just go to that 9.7, because that's quite a good example. In terms of table 9.7, what we've attempted to show there is that match up between the descriptive text that sits within the cabinet paper, the itemisation, and how it would appear if it was put through the enabling framework criteria it's used in a procurement setting effectively. And again, let's not forget, this isn't a procurement report, so we're not procuring anything. Were we to go to market, if that was a recommended option, we probably would see a slightly different approach in terms of evaluating tender responses, but we're not evaluating tender responses as part of this. We're evaluating the options appraisal that was effectively conducted by FMG. Did members have the opportunity to see that data? Yes, because it's listed in there as the entire target operating model could be asked for. If members wanted to see it, it's listed in there as a background paper. But the reality is that within the cabinet report, there was enough information for cabinets to make the decision without having to go into that level of sophistication.
Thanks. I just have two further questions of clarification before we move on to Councillor Simmons Sappho's question. Just on these tables. First of all, there was something that wasn't quite clear to me in the options review summary table in 9.3. And just looking at the first two columns, one is option 1 for insourcing in this case, and option 2 for awarding a new contract. And when we look at the second from bottom, there's 1.5 million revenue in the one case and 800,000, and then at the bottom we've got 900k and 200k. I'm not quite sure what those figures represent and how they fit. And then the other question, if I can just ask them both together, was just in the third table, 9.7, where we actually get the scoring. Just referring to Councillor Corley Harrison's point about the wellbeing model being given twice as much weight as many of the other lines there. So wellbeing, the wellbeing model, the timing and the performance quality were given double the weight of the other criteria, which including affordability and value for money. So I'd just like to know the rationale why those particular items were given double the weight than the other ones. Although I would, according to my mental arithmetic, that wouldn't actually make a difference. I don't think. I think even just fiddling with the scores. I think if you mess around with the scores, it just gives a narrower victory for the insourcing model, I think. But anyway, if you could just answer that question, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So on the options review summary, effectively this is a kind of a snapshot summary of the FMG evaluation work at a point in time. And what is effectively showing there is that the award of a new contract was anticipated to cost at that point around a £200,000 revenue increase on top of what we were paying for Fusion at that particular moment, and also require capital investment across the stock of around 10.6 million in terms of getting all of the leisure centres up to a sort of a complete work completed standard effectively. And then the option around insourcing option 1 shows that there would be an additional anticipated £900,000 revenue growth on the existing budget for an insourcing one. And again, the same type of capital investment, because the point is that we would still need to invest in the property in the same way, effectively, whether it's through a contracted service or whether it's something we provide ourselves. So it's the same capital investment. In terms of the next table, I'm going to pass over to Mark, if I can, who was part of the working group evaluation team. So,
thank you, Chair. In terms of tabling 9.5, it's just really a picturisation of what was already covered up in the Cabinet report anyway, because the purpose of going through the options appraisal is effectively look at the options that are viable and the ones that are non-viable. What this table does is does it pictorially, but we did that in textual terms in the Cabinet report. So we've narrowed it down from 5 options down to 2. The option of mothballing, for example, if we mothballed, all the existing members of staff working for Fusion effectively would be made redundant. And that's Haringey residents being made redundant through a process of mothballing. Clearly not a good approach. Whilst we decide what we're going to do with those leisure centres, and if we did decide to open up again, we've then got an issue about recruiting. So as an option, it doesn't really stack up, and that's sort of the approach we've taken in the textual terms in the Cabinet report. So what this does, it sifts through those 5 options and just really pulls out that a new contract and insourcing are really the only 2 that we should be looking at. So even from a very quick and dirty assessment, there's no need to actually look over a 5-year period for those 3 options, in options 2, 3 and 4, because they really don't stack up. They're not offering the well-being, the social value that Councillor Simmons Sappho, for example, has talked about in New River. So, but when you come through to the table of 9.7, the reason for the weighting, that table, in terms of that weighting, is what was used for the assessment of New River. So it just replicates what was taken in terms of the New River approach, gives that same weighting, and that's the outcome. But as you said, it probably wouldn't make any difference in terms of the outcome.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Simmons-Sappho.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's two questions I'd like to ask. What is generally done? Because from where I'm standing and looking at these reports, I can see that there are 5 options, and it appears that you've looked at them all. The second thing, that the only thing that I have created that I'm wondering, because we have questions coming from the group at the Lido, perhaps they could have been separated and not looked at as one homogeneous group, so that anxiety levels were not raised, because looking at it, they perhaps would see it as one big homogeneous group. And because it wasn't explicit, then people got anxious. But those are the two questions. What is generally done in relation to transparency? And could we have done it a little bit differently in regards to maybe teasing it out so that there is a very visible thing for the public to see, so that there's no anxiety levels and we can bait that down? So those are the two things that I'm asking. Thank you.
I'll go first. So in terms of transparency, I think Barry has already touched on this in his answer earlier on around there are some very clear commercial sensitivities that are still ongoing with Fusion. It has been there have been very difficult conversations in terms of negotiating the exit from the contract, and we've got to respect that confidentiality as we move towards the end point in October 2024 with that. So we want to be as transparent as possible, but obviously there are still those commercial sensitivities that we still need to manage and respect. In terms of anxiety levels, we want to reassure the Park Road Lido users group in particular around our intentions, and that is to absolutely keep the Lido open. We want to, we've already are thinking about how we can invest in it in terms of energy saving measures. There are other ideas, and I think the way to manage some of those anxieties is around some of the consultation work and the co-production work that we want to do. There has been a huge amount of work that Zoe in particular has been working on, and I would really welcome her input into talk about how we want to engage with the different groups that I talked about when I made my statement earlier on as well this evening. So we can gather those views of people who currently use the services, people who don't use the services that we would like to encourage in, and other stakeholders and groups and different representatives and community groups that we think should be using our leisure services as well, because they, the way that Fusion has run the leisure services has meant that people have turned away from them. There were a huge number of people that could be invited back in to use them that would help both with in terms of income generation, but making sure that the different groups that who should be using the services are able to use them.
Can I just ask one more question, please? In relation to what you're saying in regards to inclusion and accessibility, has there been an equality impact assessment done? And also, do you have, because October is, I mean, it seems far away, but it goes really quickly. And I'm just thinking about the stakeholders that you talked about and the focus groups and how you're going to actually engage them to ensure that the next strategy will be inclusive.
Yeah, so do you want to answer that one, because you've been leading on a lot of the work around the engagement piece?
Thank you. I think we recognise this is a really amazing opportunity for us to have a really detailed conversation with residents. And I say residents and not just users of our facilities, because we particularly want to hear from people who don't use the facilities. And I think the way we're looking at it is we would like to do this in several stages. And I think the first the first stage would be a very broad brush approach so that we speak to as many people as possible and give them an opportunity to get off their chest all the things that we know have been going wrong. People do want to tell us how difficult it's been. We know from, of course, these meetings, it's important that people vent their frustrations around the services they have received. And we want to give them that opportunity, but also then to turn that into a conversation around what they want from these facilities. And particularly when we put that into the context of the wellbeing opportunity, actually to have conversations with people around what makes them feel healthy, what boosts their well-being. And we recognise that not all of that activity will take place in a leisure centre, as crucial as those centres are. So we have a really great opportunity to have those more detailed conversations. And once we've done that broad exercise, we'd then like to drill down into the conversations around how we can then shape our services going forward so they meet the needs of our communities. So we might be able to have some very detailed conversations with specific groups about issues that are relevant to them. And we would like to move into an area of co-production where we're actually engaging with people around how we can design our services going forwards. So we do recognise this is a really exciting opportunity. You also mentioned the equalities impact assessment, and that will also flow from that piece of work because we want to be listening to what our residents are saying that they want from these services and building that into our assessment of how we can provide the maximum equality of services as we go forward from October.
I'll just do one little
Just quick follow-up,
quick follow-up. I'm very passionate about inclusion. I'm a social worker by trade, and you have special needs schools in the borough. There's one particular one called the Grove. Children with autism, it's a lifesaver. They haven't had access to the swimming pool. I'm also concerned about people that look like me, that don't necessarily use the leisure services and haven't been welcoming for a period of time. And I'm just curious to understand how, what mechanisms you're going to use to engage those communities who perhaps have digital poverty as well. So that's where my curiosity lies, and how much money is going to be spent so that you can confidently say you are reaching the communities that do not necessarily use those services. Thank you.
I think what we're trying to achieve from the different layers of engagement that we're planning for the next few months is room to have different conversations in different ways. So yes, an online consultation tool will be a very broad brush way of starting that conversation, but then we'd really welcome you to nominate different groups that we can go and have specific conversations with, and you highlight a really important group that we'd be very happy to engage with. And of course, there are many others as well. So that will definitely form part of those more detailed conversations we want to have. And we know that there are people who use the facilities and will have some really detailed user experience, but we also know there are people who wouldn't want to step foot in one of those centres, and we want to know why and what would bring them in and convert them to users.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks. I believe Councillor Connor has a question.
I have indeed. So thank you very much and for sort of the explanation so far. I'm just going to come back to Barry though on the details in the paper. So I sat through the Haringey Development Vehicle call-in. That had exempt papers which were enormous. That was right in the middle of a procurement with Lend-Lease. It was huge. We had access to all that information. Now tonight, obviously we're not going to say what we've seen, but we have seen exempt papers. So there was such a thing, and it's very unusual. I don't think I've ever seen a case where we don't have in something like this, where there's, as you said, very sensitive, confidential information. So I think for us, I think it's around the confidence that the cabinet members saw that, because it wasn't in the report. So I think just an understanding of why that wasn't, the exempt papers weren't there, I think is really helpful. The second bit is about the information that you've now said that's within these papers to scrutiny. I think for me, the aspect that my colleague just brought up on the weighting given to certain areas, I think it's a lot clearer in this table. The wellbeing model, I'm really interested in this. A chair of adults and health, this is like I'm like, right, okay, so I searched and I searched and I searched. All I could find was a report actually in your report back in the cabinet paper that said that this is going to be developed. So it's not actually there. So I don't understand how any scoring, because the new contract got a scoring of 4, and the in-source contract got a score of 8. But this policy doesn't exist. And if it does, you don't reference it anywhere. And I've literally went through all those links that you provided. And then I went through more links and more links and more links, thinking it'll be somewhere. And I just genuinely couldn't see that. So I don't know how that decision was made on that. And then the other bit that I just wanted to bring around was the financing. So for me, I think the really difficult point at this moment, if this was like pre-COVID, we were in a much better financial situation, I think we'd be having a very different conversation around this table tonight. But for me, every penny counts. We've just heard what the impact on the libraries is with budget or a draft proposal that's going through at the moment. So every penny counts. And at the moment, from the information that you've given, it is on your papers, all the financial information is that the insourcing model is more expensive. So affordability and value for money, the insourcing comes out worse than the new contract. The short-term costs on 9.5, the risks of insourcing is high compared to medium. The money in operations review summary, we're looking at almost double for those short-term costs. I can't see here, other than the fact that you've scored this well-being and social well-being model and other ones, which I don't know how you've got the figures on because you haven't explained how you've scored that. But anything that is to do with market or risk, even your own report back in the cabinet paper says the operational risk, it would be better if we outsourced, if we had a new contract, because the operational risk would sit with the contractor, it would reduce budget risks, and there's an ability to generate a predicted income. You give it to specialists in the industry, and the council could retain control over capital repairs and maintenance. So the question I have to ask, and I'm sure we've all asked tonight, is based on all this financial aspect of it, in the state the council is in at the moment, having to make £44 million worth of savings in 2 years' time, and we're still having to make savings now, how can we justify this at this moment, increasing the financial risk to the council? Thanks.
If I can respond, Chair, is that okay? Yeah, okay, right. I might have to call some of my colleagues in on some of the evaluation aspects, but I'll try and go through. So just going back to the HDV call-in, I mean, it is a very different exercise. So we're doing an options appraisal on what we do with our leisure service versus the HDV, which was a much bigger full-scale procurement exercise. And as I say, this isn't a procurement report. So we are in a very different position to the HDV. And I wouldn't necessarily liken this, from my understanding of it, I mean, I wasn't around in the organisation at the time, but from what I understand of the exercise, I wouldn't see this as being a comparable exercise in that respect. I think that had we, if we were going into a position where we were carrying out a procurement exercise and we were receiving tender responses from an organisation putting in a bid, then we would absolutely expect to see those tender submissions featuring within a procurement report as an exempt paper. But that's not what we're seeing here. What we're seeing here is an evaluation conducted by an external organisation for us to take into account a whole range of aspects in terms of what represents best value, and that it doesn't just include the financials, but that also includes the wider social impacts, the wider environmental impacts, the operational determinations of each of those 5 options that are there. Sorry, I've just been locked out of my computer. Give me 2 seconds. And so what we're seeing is something different. The papers, the background papers, the target operating model, as I said, it is extensive. It is in itself, in its own, as its raw data, relatively inaccessible, but was absolutely available should members want to see it. And it was listed in that cabinet paper as a background document. Throughout this process, which I think we mentioned started back realistically in January, we first had the conversations around, well, what do we do with our leisure provision moving forward? And, so we're going on a year effectively. Throughout that process, there have been a range of sessions and meetings internally that have looked at the information coming back from FMG, which in itself has been iterative. It hasn't changed, particularly through challenge process between officers and FMG. There have been briefing sessions to Councillor Arkell as the portfolio holder. There have been briefing sessions to CLT, the council leadership team. There have been briefing sessions to the wider cabinet around where we are at different periodic points within this process. And within that, we have given a snapshot in terms of where we are from a financial perspective on each of the options available. So members have been in a position where they have had an understanding, they have had a briefing. The cabinet paper itself talks through and summarises the findings that in the FMG target operating model, and the financial detailed information is available as a background document. So I think it is there. I think, and as I say, I wouldn't liken it to the HDV myself, because I think that they're incredibly different pieces of work. In terms of the reference in terms of the weighting and the criteria, I'm going to pass over to Mark if I can, just to talk through that, because that's part of a working group evaluation, which Mark was part of.
Thank you, Barry. I guess the issue you're focusing in on the scoring in that table is more on the wellbeing model and the fact it doesn't exist at the moment. It's fair to say that we've done a lot of preliminary work through Budget Fortnight, looking at the way in which we could expand out the way in which we utilise the leisure centres in a much broader way to address issues for adult and social care and also for children's services, and how we expand and integrate those, tie in far more with the NHS and other community groups as well, to expand and make better use of those facilities, but also tackle some of the pressures those services have. So what we've had through the conversations that Barry just referenced is the level of enthusiasm that Zoe exhibited just now in terms of answering the previous question across every single directorate in the council, where everyone is actually very much geared towards delivering that wellbeing model. And that level of enthusiasm in terms of actually being able to generate that new way of delivering services tied into the physical and sports strategy approach means that that score of 8 is the one that we think is justified, because it's going to actually generate those social and environmental values. And that is the key thing in terms of that table. In terms of performance and service quality, we believe that we can actually provide a better service and provide it more consistently with well-trained, motivated staff that we would not necessarily get if we actually went out to a different contractor. In terms of the timing issues, it really amounts to the same. And all the other scores are fairly comparable, but really and truly, they, again, as I said earlier on, they just really reflect what is covered off in textual terms in the cabinet report. And that's how we've ended up with those scores.
I'm really sorry, Mark, and I know I'm not trying to be difficult here, but this policy doesn't exist. So I read the report, I've read the second report. I understand the rationale and where you're wanting to go, and as in adults and health, makes perfect sense. But I don't know what's in that wellbeing policy. There is nothing that I can hold on to and say, right, to my NHS colleagues, this is it, this is why this has been scored. So whilst it's a great idea, I don't see it. So I don't understand how you can score something that doesn't exist yet, except as a great idea, but it's actually quite complex. It's great. It's, great in ambition, but it just doesn't exist. So can you just explain this, why it's scored when it doesn't exist?
It's scored in that way because we have the ability to create it. We've got the opportunity to tie into other policies as well as they exist. We've already got that physical and sports strategy. We're already seeing the benefit we've actually achieved through New River. It's really replicating that on a grander scale and integrating with those other services. It does not exist at the moment, but it will exist. And part of the engagement that Zoe referenced will help shape that. We need to know what our local residents actually want in terms of how it can actually improve their life, their well-being, their health, and it will help shape that well-being model, what we can actually achieve to meet those aspirations of the local population. We would do that in terms of actually integrating that approach But we don't believe that you can actually necessarily achieve that through a contracted service. There would not be the appetite to deliver that. The appetite from a commercial operator is effectively to ensure they're covering the costs, if not making a little bit of profit.
If I can just come back on that last bit. So yeah, throughout this whole process, we've been quite clear that there's the option to insource is a more expensive option. There's at no point have we said anything other than that, and of course that brings with it a greater financial burden. However, the predominant reason for that inflated cost is because of staff salaries and terms and conditions being better with us as an organisation and an employer than they are in the private sector. And what we have seen through the years that we've had with our existing contractor is a service that hasn't necessarily been where we want it to be. We've seen areas for opportunity, certainly as we've been going through the evaluation process, both in terms of staff training and also in terms of consistency, and also general staffing levels as well, all of which will add value effectively to the organisation and to the service itself. And I think we've seen that with New River. We've seen the change with the staff transferring over and with how the service has improved there. This, as going back to that process around governance and interrogation, this process has been through a lot of internal interrogation. We've had a steering group that effectively has consisted of majority of the council leadership team. There has been interrogation from a whole range of business partners in terms of developing this options appraisal and presenting it as a cabinet paper. We are in a position where we're not saying that it's cheaper. What we're saying is that cheaper isn't better. What we're saying is that actually this option to insource is the right option for the organisation for all of the reasons discussed in the cabinet paper. And just on that last point around, I suppose, the long-term benefits versus an insourced or a contracted service, and particularly around the bit about our Section 114 situation. I think the one thing that we have seen from discussions that we've had with organisations that have gone into Section 114 territory has been around the benefits of having freedom and sovereignty for in-house services versus being tied into long-term expensive contracts. To get out of a contract in a situation like Section 114 and be able to reallocate that funding elsewhere is going to be a costly process in itself. It doesn't mean that it's protected as a service. It doesn't mean that it's got that protection, because organisations in that position will need to look at whatever they can do to reducing their spend ultimately. Now, I think we're talking about an absolute doomsday scenario in the event that the organisations had to issue a Section 114. And I think one of the only benefit I can possibly see realistically about any of the options is having that command and control over how we spend, what we spend, and how we generate income, rather than being fixed to a long-term regular payment to an organisation which is effectively profit to that organisation.
Thank you. So I just had a question of clarification about the higher revenue cost of insourcing. The report talks about 946,000 revenue growth necessary. So how much of that represents better pay and conditions for the staff?
And I might need to ask colleagues, but I think it's about 80%, if that's correct. Yeah, about 80% of it is terms and conditions.
So the lion's share of this then is putting the staff that are working in the leisure centres on the same or similar terms and conditions to other council staff, which therefore suggests to me, this is just a comment really, that by keeping it as an outsourced service, we're effectively saving money by allowing staff delivering council services to be paid and treated in a way that we wouldn't be prepared to do to our own staff. Would you agree with that?
I would agree certainly that the outsourced model generates its savings through reduced and weakened terms and conditions and pay for staff.
Thank you. Councillor Connor.
Sorry, a very quick point on that. I completely agree with having staff well paid, great terms and conditions. Absolutely got no quarrel with that at all. My slight concern though is that in the budget paper we had that we needed to make savings. So my worry is that we're spending here, but yet in library services we're looking for some of the services now to be provided by volunteers. We can't even afford the staff. So our staff are not going to exist in our libraries in the same way that we had them before. And they were great. They had great terms and conditions. They had great pay. Now then they're now in a very different arena for in not the core libraries, but the what you call them, the other little libraries around, which Muswell is one of them. But I'm just sort of saying, so actually looking at this, when we're looking at the finances, are we in the position as a council to be able to in-source at this moment in a time when all the work in the paper say it's going to cost a lot more? And I completely understand about the staff aspect. I would absolutely love it if we could in-source because of that. But my concern is that from a scrutiny perspective, are we challenging you guys enough to say, is this the moment where we can take on extra, we're taking on an outside business and we're going to be running it. And a lot of the councils that have gone bankrupt, a lot of the reports are now saying, well, actually, they took on other areas and tried to provide those services. And that has sort of tipped them over the edge. I'm just wanting to be really clear tonight from everyone, all the officers sitting around the table, that this isn't the situation.
I think that probably falls on me rather than anybody else, councillor. The budget position that we find ourselves in is obviously very difficult. At £16 million gap that we have, of which this is included within it. Budgets represent are really the financial manifestation of policy decisions, and a policy decision has been taken that the service being provided by Fusion is not what's required, and that in order to provide what's required, the cabinet have put that into the medium-term financial strategy, and that will be addressed when we get to February with a raft of measures that will deliver a balanced budget at that point. So we're not in a position of the section 114 notice or anything like that, and it's just in the mix of the budget. You could probably focus on elements of adult social care growth that we've had, children's growth, all of those things. This is just another component of the council's budget, and it will have to resolve the issues by the Cabinet's February report. Sorry?
That doesn't really help because in 2 years' time we have to make £44 million worth of savings. So I'm just asking at this point here, is this the moment that we as a council take on external things and run them ourselves in as much as there's extra costs?
So I would suggest that that's more of a question for the cabinet member.
Oh, sorry.
So I think the reason why various councils have issued section 114 notices is very different up and down the country. To start with, we have some similarities with other councils and very different situations from others. I think that's really important to note. I'm concerned about the conflation of the proposals and the consultation that's happening on library services at the moment with what we're doing with leisure services. I think we are making absolutely the right decision for the staff that are working in leisure services to bring them in-house and to put them on the same terms and conditions as other council employees. We've got to look at our library services to evolve them. There are proposals that we want to look at in terms of income generation for them as well, and there are plans being put together for them at the moment. And in the same way with our leisure services, there are proposals to generate income for the range of services that we provide across the borough. So I think they do need to be separated out. They can't be conflated together because they are completely different services and different residents and different populations and communities use them.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone have any further questions? No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Right. We are slightly behind time, but okay. So the Deputy Monitoring Officer now and John O'Keefe from Finance are going to introduce the report in the pack, which responds to the question of whether the decision was inside the policy and budget framework.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will start, John, if you don't mind. So the report, as you say, answers a single question, which is whether or not the decision taken by Cabinet falls within the budget and policy framework. On page 1 of the report, which is agenda items in the pack, asks members to note the call-in process, which is set out in the report, and that the advice from the monitoring officer and the chief financial officer is that the decision falls within the budget and policy framework. If you turn over to page 3 of the pack, which is paragraph 6.6, it sets out the current policy framework as it appears in the Constitution. Councillor Corley Harrison, in his presentation, referred to a best value policy as being part of the policy framework. And as you can see on that page, there is no such policy within the framework. So there is a reference to a best value performance plan, which is a document which actually no longer exists. The requirement for councils to produce a best value performance plan fell away about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And so there's a piece of work to update the Constitution, in which we'll see the removal of that reference to the best value performance plan. And so if I take you to paragraph 8 of the report, you will see that the monitoring officer does not consider that the decision is contrary to any of the plans or strategies forming the policy framework. None of these are concerned with the provision of leisure services in general terms, and far less specifically in relation to matters such as insourcing. So as far as the policy framework is concerned, we are not, the advice is clear that it falls within. And in finance.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. And so we concluded as the Chief Finance Officer that Cabinet's decision to insource leisure services on the 5th of December 23 does not commit the council to revenue or capital expenditure in future years. You'll note from the resolution, it expressly provides that the revenue budget and capital programme implications of the decision be considered, be included in the draft medium-term financial strategy, and the final version of which will be considered by Cabinet in February and presented to full council in March 24. And in relation to the 23-24 position, that any mobilisation costs and costs incurred between up to now and going forward are containable within the existing resources within the environment and resident experience budget. And it's for these two reasons that the Chief Finance Officer has concluded that is within the budget framework.
Okay, thank you. Now, do any members of the committee have any questions related to this report? Just to confirm, you're saying that when Councillor Corley Harrison says that value for money is a key part of the policy framework, that's not correct. That's not correct, right? And John, when you say that the decision does not commit the council to new capital or revenue spending, what you're saying is that the increased capital and revenue spending that it does imply is already dealt with in the or is intended to be dealt with within the MCFS, which is.
Yeah, that's correct. It's a very sort of narrow question or narrow response, unfortunately, that's needed here, because we cannot commit expenditure now for budgets that don't exist. We have to wait, and we can take the decision, and it will be subject to the council's decision in March when it approves or otherwise doesn't the budget. At that point, those budgets become live from the 1st of April.
So for it to be outside because that decision for the next financial year has not yet been made, for it to be outside the budget framework, it would have to commit to spending this financial year then. Thank you for clarifying that. Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, John and Heidi, for your report. Right, now we are in danger of going beyond our 10 p.m. Time. I hope we don't have to do that, but I think just for just in case that happens, because we're about to go into private session, I think it'd be a good idea if we could invoke Council Standing Order 63 and allow the suspension of Council Standing Order 18 to allow the meeting to go beyond 10 p.m. if necessary. So are we happy to agree that?
Agreed.
Right, that's agreed. Thank you. Right, so I'm just slightly lost as to where we are now. Okay. Yeah. So okay, so we need to we now need to go into private session. So the committee members and officers are going to go into private session. Right. Yes. I'm just finding the correct standing order. Right. So it's under Council Standing Order 14 bracket O. Number 1, I think. I move. Oh no, I move. I move that the press and public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting to consider exempt information as defined under paragraphs 3, Part 1, Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. So, are we happy to agree that? Okay, so we're now going to go away to have a look at the exempt information and have our deliberations. We will come back after however long that takes us. Hopefully it won't be beyond 10 o'clock to relate the decision of the committee and formally agree that. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Testing.
Started the recording, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. So the committee have come to a decision on the call-in. First of all, we've come to a decision on whether the decision is inside or outside the policy and budget framework. We've agreed that the decision is inside the policy and budget framework. So just for the record and the minutes, can committee members indicate their agreement?
Agreed.
Yep.
Agreed, sorry.
Okay, that's agreed formally. Thank you. Right, so further to that, we've considered the information from the deputation, the public questions, the lead of the call-in from the cabinet member and the officer report, and the exempt information. And we've agreed that no further action is to be taken. I'm just asking for committee members to indicate their agreement for the record. So can all those in favour of that please raise their hands? And all those against? So that's formally agreed by 4 votes to 1. Okay, so just to outline the reasons for the decision tonight, we obviously heard the discussion. A lot of the discussion was focused around the availability of information to the cabinet in making the decision. We are confident that cabinet had the information that they needed to make the decision, and that formed, if it didn't form part of the papers directly, it was referred to as background papers, and all the necessary information that is asked for in the call-in was available to cabinet members in those background papers. Secondly, there was quite a lot of discussion on the value for money. We felt that that has been dealt with by the information that was provided in the officer report and the information that was provided in the discussion, and also focusing on the fact that it's not just about financial value, but the other benefits that are provided by the various options in the papers. So those were the main reasons for our decision this evening. Thank you very much. I don't think there's anything further. No, so we can close the meeting. Thank you very much for staying so late. And thank you very much to officers and to cabinet member for being here. And yeah, we can all go home and have something to eat.
Thank you, Chair.